Good afternoon. My name is Bobby Hollingsworth, and I welcome you to the Stopwatch Session this afternoon. The way this is going to work, if you've been to one of these before, you already know, but if you haven't, the way this is going to work is we got 5 fantastic presentations. They'll all have 6 minutes. After the 6 minutes, the 5, 6 minutes, 30 minutes, good at math. Anyway, the way we do it after that, 10 minutes, at the end, 10 minutes, hold your questions. If you have great questions, write them down, remember them, because we're going to come back at the end for the 10 minutes so we can go ahead and answer any questions you might have. We're going to go in the order of the program, so we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll talk to you again in about 30 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rhonda Glacier, and I'm Director of Collections Management at Kramer Family Library in Colorado Springs. Larry Eames is with me, and he is one of our instruction librarians. And we want to talk today about a project we took on this summer to revitalize our selection process. So this is basically who we are. Like I said, we're Kramer Family Library at the University of Colorado Springs. We actually, just a year ago, got R2 status, which we're now trying to grapple with what that means for our collection. And our budget, our materials budget is about $1.8 million. Of that, this year, $140,000 will be spent on single title purchases. Before 2019, we were spending about $250,000 on single title purchases. So all of our main collection, our print collection, was individually selected title by title. We didn't do any kind of approval plans or any other way of getting materials into the collection. We had a traditional liaison model, which is basically where a subject librarian would meet with departments and work with them on their requests and do instruction for them and help them with their research. And we had 10 librarians in that role. I created the task force this summer. I led the task force, and we had Larry, who was liaison librarian for the instruction team, join us. We also had a liaison librarian who was the head of our cataloging department, also joined the group. We added interlibrary loan staff to the group because interlibrary loan had just recently been moved into technical services and is now part of our acquisitions department. And we wanted to explore ways to bring that person into the selection and acquisition process as well. And then both of our acquisition staff members were part of this group. We met 4 times in July and August for about 3 to 4 hours each time to come up with the model we're now going to show you.
Thank you, Rhonda. So for context on some of our concerns, one of the initial proposals that was put forward would be to fully decouple selection from the liaison model. And we, the liaison librarians, had some initial reactions to that were not positive. We were worried about a loss of expertise in selection. We were worried that the collection and the needs of our faculty and students would start to drift apart as that expertise in our areas and relationships to our faculty was sort of eroded in that way. And we were worried that limited resources would lead to poor selection choices if done by generalists. So as we approached and as I approached this group, those were the things that I was bringing to the table that I wanted to be sure were addressed. And we identified a few issues in our first sessions. We clearly needed to improve communication between selectors and acquisitions. We evidently needed a better way for selectors to know what had been purchased and what hadn't been, because that was a real moment where the process was gummed up. That back and forth where we were asking acquisitions and acquisitions was asking us was a real problem because we were wasting a lot of time in that process. Orders came in really sporadically, which made it really difficult for acquisitions and cataloging to have a dependable normative workflow. We needed to standardize what notes we selectors used when talking to acquisitions because, again, that point of communication was where that system got gummed up. And we needed to know how much money we needed to spend a month to support those orders coming in on a regular basis. So all those points of communication were ultimately what we wanted to address with our model. And as I said, right, we both wanted the same things. Acquisitions didn't want to bother us with too much communication. We were trying not to bother acquisitions. They wanted to let us be flexible, but we were open to having clear guidelines to support what acquisitions needed, and they needed some more effective ways of communicating that to us than just going back and forth over email, because I'm sure we all know those get lost really fast in our inboxes. So the final outcome that we came up with was, one, a better shared understanding of our process. That back and forth was really productive in and of itself in those meetings. Our new selection model involves our budgets being presented in semi-monthly increments rather than as a lump sum, and having that be a target for us to spend down every couple of months. If any money from that increment is left over, that gets put in a pot to be spent as we see fit at the end of the year. And this is an experimental process which is still playing out. So we have yet to discover what we will see fit to do with any of those extra funds. So we're really excited about this outcome. We're really excited to see how it goes and how it addresses the issues that we had named and identified. Thank you.
It is. That's right.
Oh, here, it's on there.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our session from Introspection to Action, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Collection Development Pilot at UC Davis. I'm Belen Fernandez, Collection Strategist Librarian for Arts and Humanities, and this is my distinguished colleague.
Hi, I'm Allison Lanius, the Collection Strategist Librarian for Social Sciences and Area Studies. And as you can tell from our almost identical titles, we both work in the same department, which is Collection Strategies at UC Davis. So when we're looking at the diversity program for UC Davis, the first thing we want to look at is our demographics. We have a very large campus with over 41,000 students. That's every type of student. So of them, about 31,000 are undergraduate. Almost all of them are full-time students. 14% are from international students from 140 countries. 28% are from underrepresented minorities, and 38% are first-generation college students. And the next bit of data, I'm not going to read through it, but it shows you that we have a really diverse campus, and so we want to support that in our plans. Also, so starting out, our library was one of 4, and at this point there's only 2 libraries on campus. So it's Peter J. Shields Library, and this is where we're doing a lot of the strategic planning priorities. We deal with everything but medical stuff. So all the medical related collection is done on a different library. Shields Library opened in 1955, and we have over 3.1 million items. We're the 3rd largest library in the University of California system, who we collaborate quite a bit, and even more now. We have just recently pulled together a system-wide integrated library system. And so our new strategic planning process for the UC Davis libraries began in 2021, and the libraries identified diversity, equity, and inclusion as the key guiding principles in our strategic plan. These principles are embedded in each of the 5 priorities that will guide our work over the coming years.
Well, I'd like to tell you a little bit about these strategic plan directives, because everyone in the library is working on one of these in some capacity. So it's all strategic plan all the time. Priority 1 is to create a welcoming physical and virtual spaces for our diverse campus members. Number 2 is to empower diverse communities to succeed in education. And we're working hard to become a Hispanic serving institution, so that's part of what that means. Number 3, to advance our role as a catalyst in research and collaboration. We are an R1 institution with medical school and nursing and veterinary medicine, so that makes sense, right? And number 4, priority 4, which is near and dear to our hearts, to ensure that our collections embrace equity, reflect diverse populations, and adapt to meet clinical care research needs. And that's what this is all relating to for us. And number 5, to spark organizational culture rooted in empathy and transparency, and to enable an atmosphere of well-being and growth. So, let me talk to you about initial challenges, because there were some. And Alice and I were, and my colleagues, the other colleagues in the department, we reflected very deeply about this and grappled with how can librarians ensure that a collection embraces equity and reflects diverse populations and can adapt to clinical care and research needs. How should librarians address cultural perspectives, authorship, audience, and subject matter to create an inclusive library going forward? And adding to this, for just like a little extra, like frosting, how do we do this? How do we integrate this initiative into our existing budgets, which have existed reductions this year? Yay us. So, of course, being good little librarians, the first thing we did was a literature review, and looked at how other institutions were grappling with this, and are there any good ideas we could steal? Sadly, no, because there's no magic bullet, there's no plan, there's no template, there's no organization that's going to put a label on our collection and say, well done, you have a diverse collection. So that kind of pushed us back to the drawing board a little bit. Collaborations with vendors, reviewing their diversity, equity, and inclusion ebook packages. Oh, 1 minute, sorry, and I'll talk faster now. Sorry.
Want me to go?
Yes, please.
Also, in addressing other areas of our strategic plan, we've created partnerships on campus. For example, we have one with our bookstore that has expanded access to electronic course-related materials.
So finally, we've decided to do 2 small collection development projects that will focus on bringing scores from unrepresented composers to the library and identifying publishers that focus on acquisitions from traditionally marginalized authors. And what's next? We're going to come to conferences to collaborate with fellow librarians. We're going to assess our 2 pilot programs in 23 and hopefully build more ambitious projects after that in later 23. And of course, we'd like to hear your comments and suggestions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To my colleagues at UC Davis, that's pretty much my presentation as well. Thank you. Yeah, I don't have, let me set this up. I don't have slides for you today. I'm taking this from a slightly different angle. I'm not a collections development person. I am a specialist in diversity, equity, inclusion, and organizational development. And I'm at Purdue University, which of course many of you know, or some of you maybe not, is a very large land grant, some would say land grab, university in central Indiana. We're quite known for our engineering, pharmacy, and health discipline, health sciences, Credit School of Business, aeronautical and astronautical engineering, but that doesn't mean that we don't have other significant portfolios in disciplines like education, speech pathology, entrepreneurial business practices, and hospitality. Humanities, social sciences, and even fine and performing arts are there. They're just neglected, I should say, and very, very small. So the challenge, as our colleagues just said, is that there is no real model for doing the type of assessment that we need to do with respect to large research collections. There is some literature out there. There's some pockets of promise around using some large aggregator cataloging tools for assessment, doing content studies, particularly around distinctive collections, special collections, and archives, and of course special collection, subject-specific analyses that we're all familiar with. The problem is that there's really been a varying degree of value in those processes, and those processes often take a lot of human time and consequently money, and that most organizations these days just don't have. So liaison responsibilities, unfortunately, as hard as we try, often fall short, often yield not the type of feedback that we hope to collect when we reach out to faculty to learn more about their research needs and teaching and what have you. So this is maybe a little bit meta, but the problem here is not how to do this, but from our perspective, if we build it, will they come? Or to kind of paraphrase that, if we buy it, will they use it? And that's what we're kind of experimenting with at this point in time with some of our partners, some here in this room. at Progress, excuse me, and they didn't pay me to say that. You know, again, it's a little bit meta here, but my question is, it's somewhat rhetorical. Are we doing our stakeholders a disservice if our collection development policies reflect only our teaching curricula and only the research needs of our faculty, students, who we know are multidimensional, right, have many, many interests across a wide variety of topics and subject, not to mention just the core of the interdisciplinary nature of what's happening these days in all of these disciplines and how they connect with one another. So what collecting more broadly, you know, from digitized primary sources, reflective of the lived experiences and cultures and material outputs of other cultures from minoritized, racialized, and otherwise marginalized opportunities, groups get us where we need to go. I don't know, you know, we don't know. So we're engaging in an experiment, working with several of our vendors to collect a lot of content. We've made, again, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging is deeply embedded in our strategic plan, which is about 2 years old or so, so very, very similar. And so what does this mean for us, and what does it mean to deeply embed those principles in everything that we do? Collections is just a part of what we do in libraries and archives, but it's core to what we do. So we recognize that we are an extremely privileged institution and organization to be able to make the final financial commitments to collect this stuff that we have. But we're excited to see where it leads us as an opportunity to invite scholars, right, to attract other scholars, other you know, instructors into our fold as we think about how to roll this out and how to make it more accessible and actually provide case studies perhaps for how the content can be used both in an instructional context but in other contexts as well. So I have about 40 more minutes of content, so but I want to be yeah, so I just want to be mindful of that. So yeah, I mean again, and if you, just one last thing, I think, in lieu of an institutional strategic plan, as an example, we don't have an institutional strategic plan at Purdue. We have something called Purdue's Moves, and we're in the second iteration of that, and it's called Purdue's Next Moves. And one of those moves is specifically focused around the Black experience at Purdue. And again, what does that look like? You know, how can we ensure that our content and our collections are reflective of that? We know that there is a huge gap in the historical record, right, in the artistic and cultural record from our institution, and bringing in and again having conversations with some of our folks, with some of our vendors who are, thank goodness, spending so much more time on this content, curating this content, and are building business models to make it more accessible. But again, as I mentioned, we know we're in a privileged position right now, but I will tell you and will share with you, you know everything about an organization or institutional values based on, you can tell a lot based on their budget. And if we can't really articulate that we're making these investments, then we really can't say that we're committed. So we might as well just pack up and go home. So that's what I have to say about that. So yeah, I think that, again, we need to think about this holistically and comprehensively. You know, it's just a part of what we do, again, with respect to collections, and the collections being part and core to our mission. But what are the implications for open access? What are the implications for descriptive practices, for archival curation, for teaching? That's another thing that may be somewhat anomalous. At Purdue University, we are a School of Information Studies that actually doesn't confer an information studies degree. If you want to know more information about that, you can ask me about that later. Yes, it is odd. But you know, what does equity look like in a complex and dynamic system like that we have at Purdue? So I think I'm out of time. Thank you. I hope it's helpful, and happy to answer any questions about some of the investments that we've made.
All right. So I was originally supposed to do this proposal with Kelly LaVoice, who is the Associate Director of the Walker Management Library at Vanderbilt Law School. My name is Mark Williams. I am the Associate Director at the Massey Law Library at Vanderbilt Law School. And Kelly couldn't be with us here today, and we were supposed to be talking sort of both about business accreditation for business schools, and then I was going to speak more to the law school side. So I'm going to be speaking a little bit on her behalf today, but she also happens to be my wife, so I'm at least hoping with some reasonable confidence that I can speak on her behalf. We'll find out later if that confidence was misplaced. But we're talking just about this more in the abstract because it's a problem that we're kind of looking at, just casually talking about that what we have noticed through, at least through our two professional associations and schools, and accreditation standards can vary from regional level to national level to discipline. But the trend that we had seen through our two associations, which for her was the AACSB, yes, which I'm not going to try to attempt to tell you what that stands for, but it is the accrediting body for professional business schools that grant MBAs, and the American Bar Association, which is for law schools. The general trend that we had seen mostly is a less prescriptive standard to a much more open-ended standard, which sort of necessitates a change in language for how you articulate the value and impact for some of these collections. Some of our traditional sort of, especially in the legal world, it was up until very recently, and this goes into things like U.S. News rankings too. It would be, we have this many volumes of this many books, and that has all been taken away from any kind of standardized language when you go into the actual American Bar Association Standard 606. And then from Kelly's experience, in the early 90s is when that kind of language sort of got stripped out, and in some cases through recent history, the library in terms of how it supports accreditation for an institution would have been removed at all. So this just requires a new way of thinking, and some of our old statistics that we may have used to supply to administrators when they're preparing for accreditation. For business schools, it's like every 5 years, ABA every 10 years. We have to come up with examples that are maybe a little bit softer examples. The ABA, it's still, I would say, a little more prescriptive than the business world in terms of they give you a core list of collections that they would like to see you have. But they're very agnostic in terms of what format you would have to have them, which I think that's a pretty standard thing we've all seen, like more about access rather than ownership. And then there's also some language about just supporting boutique and research needs of your faculty and your students, and maybe specialty programs that you might have. But what you'll find, and then you also see that administrators, they don't speak the same library vernacular we have, so they don't have a context for what your circulation statistics mean, or what a good volume number is anyway. So we try to come up with other various examples that we often see, the through line that we've seen in our two professional associations is ways to tie your collections to the research outputs and curriculum of your faculty and the students in the programs that you support. So a couple of examples that I would mention for that. In terms of, we both teach a lot of, even at Vanderbilt Law School, I teach a lot of business and law focused program. I teach a research program in that area. We also have 7 full-time faculty that teach in a law and business program. So we come up with a lot of non-traditional legal databases and research programs to support those types of needs that don't necessarily come up in the traditional law school realm, and articulating the ways and tying those programs into the research output of the school. One example I can think of is a database in particular called PitchBook, which is a kind of a finance venture capital database, and databases like that that hadn't been in the library market, refused to work with libraries 4 or 5 years ago, but we would see that our students and our faculty, when they were going out in the real world in their internships at the law firms that they would go to, or in their whatever corporations they might be interning with, they were coming back constantly asking for this database. And it took a lot of legwork to work with some of these vendors who just ignored academia for many years to get them on board and get licenses with them, and then also negotiate a level of, they're very restrictive in terms of download usage and what you can do with the data once you've taken them. There's a whole other presentation I give on just data literacy and use cases for academics and using data. But articulating like how we have gone out and proactively anticipated the needs of our faculty and our students to acquire these kind of resources and a way to sort of softly explain the impact for accreditation in terms of the value that those collections provide, even though it may not be the same in terms of statistics that you would have normally seen. Another example I could think of is sort of, we have a couple clinical programs at Vanderbilt Law School that are education, K-12 education based, and I would often acquire specialty databases for them that really no other law school in the country would have. But we would make the effort to go and acquire them, even though the barrier to entry from licensing and everything else in terms of the restrictive uses was very hard. We made that connection to demonstrate that boutique specialty program support that we could then use to articulate again without our normal measures how we support accreditation. I could talk about this for many more examples in the questions if you have, but thank you for your time.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor now for questions. If you don't remember everybody's name, I understand. If you just want to go by school, whatever, that's fine too. So if we have any questions, I'll come by with the microphone, and you feel free to ask anything you want.
I'm Emily Hopkins. I'm actually, my question, which is really a comment for the ladies who are sitting right in front of me, so I'm at the University of Georgia, and we have also been grappling with developing some kind of methodologies or pilot projects for assessing the diversity of our collection for a couple of years now. And I've been working with a colleague at Temple University, Karen Cohn, who is also, I think probably many of us in this room at libraries are working on this challenge. But she and I have developed a community of practice that is around collections and diversity, and we're really trying, it's like brand new, we're trying to get off the ground, and we're looking for people to join a listserv. We've had a meeting, we've we've submitted a proposal to do a table talk at Timberline, so that will be on, the other side of the country, which would be great to have more attendance. So I just wanted to say, I would love to hear more from y'all. Thank you.
Could you go into more detail about what you're doing specifically? Are you looking for marginalized authors who are marginalized populations themselves and producing that content?
Yeah.
How are you going about it?
So at the University of Georgia, we're actually modeling off of Laurel Christbuck's diversity award winner lists. And so our project at UGA is borrowing very heavily from that and basically trying to replicate it using our systems and tools. But the community of practice is more just trying to hear how libraries everywhere are trying to tackle the challenges of it's very dependent on your institution size, your demographics, your community, so we really wanted to create a forum for people to share ideas and talk about ways that they're trying to, experiment and create plans in their own life.
Yeah, I ask because I'm from ProQuest, and we get questions from our library customers all the time about, can you define this database based on X? Is it a Latino author? Is that sort of thing. So how would we build something like that proactively, but then also retroactively for collections you may have already purchased from us in the past? But what about the new collections you're offering moving forward? What sorts of data points would you want to know about that collection in order to meet your needs around assessment?
So one of the areas that we find really difficult is identifying the diversity of authors, because that data is often not presented by the author, and so there has been a recent project to work on trying to create, and I'm blanking on, I know you're in this room, I'm blanking on where that project is out of, that is focused on identifying diversity of authorship, but I think that's a real area of need for us. I don't want to the mic. Anybody else?
Thank you.
It's very nice to meet you in person because I was on a call with you and I'm part of your listserv, and it's fairly quiet on the listserv. But I have found that the listserv has a list of Zotero readings, and that's also been really helpful. Just in terms of the question that you asked, I think that's like the million-dollar question that everybody wants to know, and I was just attending one of the sessions earlier about collective collections and the Skulk and Use projects, where they're trying to figure out how to look at minority serving institutions and look at the unique content to see do they have unique content, and what does that look like, and what are those, because Library of Congress subject headings are not appropriate. One of the sessions I attended this morning was really interesting because it was iris.ai, and that particular company is using AI. So my comment to the Skulk and East folks was, maybe there's a way to look at publisher data and the table of contents and the chapters, and to feed that into a machine learning model to spit out some information that would help us better identify what are these diversity titles, like who are these diversity authors, or maybe not the authors part, but at least like books about this. And I feel like the publishers and the companies that, like yourselves, are more poised to do that and to look at your own data and to come up with some analytics that help us understand. And maybe you're already doing that, and that would be great, but like sharing that back with libraries would also really, I think, help, because we're all trying to solve this problem, and this is one of the problems that deeply impact all of our work, and we don't want to just buy a diversity package. We want to know, like, why is that? But you can help us to look at, are our collections diverse, or where are there gaps that is like a very valuable question. So it's nice to meet you. And yes, like, I second the listserv. It's very helpful, even though it's not.
Yeah, there's not a lot of traffic on the listserv. I think everyone is working on their projects and not, sharing out.
I think you're right.
We're
Yeah.
But we are collecting and sharing out as literature and webinars and things related to the topic, specifically as it relates to collections in academic libraries.
How do we get on that list?
Yes, I'll be happy to write down. Today, right here.
I would just like to ask the presenter from Vanderbilt. Yes, what other I'm a business librarian, so I'd like to know what other business business databases you got, and also I'm curious, like, what other non-traditional for a law library databases did you end up with?
So because of a lot of these are proactively seek out partnerships and license agreements with the Walker Management Library, who I happen to be married to the collections development library, so my situation is a little unique. But specific ones that we had brought on for some cases for the entire university, and some cases for limited seats for our students or our faculty. Words, which are Word Research Services, was a long sought after one and an expensive one. Like, sometimes we are just very blessed to be able to afford. But prior to that, like, the commitment had not been made. We rearranged our priorities in order to make the commitment to buy that. Backset was another finance database that we did, and then a must-have that I use in my 4-credit course. So I was talking about tying collections into teaching. Like, I do both. I bring this into the classroom and teaches capital IQ, which for both legal and business purposes is kind of a must-have database if you're going to work at a major corporation, it's any kind of research capacity, or at a major law firm. Something like that would be there. So it's just incumbent upon our students to have that knowledge when they go out. And a lot of times they'll come back after their second or third year internship and they'll be like, wow, I don't know what to do. I need this. So I don't even have to make a case. So those are probably the biggest ones I can think of. There's probably others, but those are the kind of the must-haves. Aside from like a Bloomberg terminal, which is available elsewhere on campus, but I can't take credit for. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, Yeah, and anything else outside of business? You said other non-traditional stuff?
For like some of our clinics at the law school, there are some like boutique databases that like literally we can only get like offer to 3 people on campus, but because we want to provide research support to our clinical faculty and the students that are involved in those programs, a couple based in sort of immigration law is a big one that we do. Again, it's often these smaller boutique databases that they don't cost that much, but they take up the most time in terms of licensing and invoicing and just all that behind the scenes stuff. The smallest ones take up the most time, but again, we're kind of connecting the research output to the resources we provide. That's just a clear-cut example, even if it's like 10 people per year, as they need that to do their clinical work. And so we make that happen. Those are probably the best.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thanks. Clyde Johnson Grau, Acquisitions and Collection Development at Loyola Marymount University. And this is a question for the Davis and Purdue folks, but it overlaps with the Colorado presentation as well. So how do you draw upon and build the expertise of librarian selectors to develop the collections related to DEI? And kind of related to that is, can we rely on the vendor side to develop diverse collections if their collections are standard? So might we end up all purchasing the same collection of diverse books?
Well, our library was recently reorganized, and we moved from the subject specialist librarian model to a collection strategist model, where I purchase in humanities and fine arts, and Allison purchases in the social sciences and area studies. And so we are the ones that make the decision, along with any input that librarians or faculty would care to give us. So that is our current model about how we select things. And in terms of evaluating vendor packages, I have a great deal of trepidation about something that comes in a box that says, this is your DEI ebook collection, hooray. You know, I feel really nervous about buying that, because that's like, how, you know, does that have like a good housekeeping seal of approval on it? I mean, how am I supposed to take that on face value? So it is, you know, there is a great deal of anxiety in looking at these purchases. And even when I'm purchasing books, item by item, I'm very thoughtful about it. And I sometimes pause and I will go and read some reviews to make sure I'm not buying a clunker. And because I want to be able to tell people that we have these. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I can also maybe add to the question about how we build our relationships with faculty through acquisitions. Because I would echo what you said about the anxiety about not knowing everything that's in the box. Because a lot of what we do with our faculty, and I think we have the ability to do this because we're, you know, not a small campus, but a smaller campus, is to have those conversations with people, watch what they're offering in terms of courses, and kind of pre-populate our idea of what we want to select that way. And I know I'll use an example from our nursing librarian, because this is one that she told me like multiple times. One of the things that she experienced with one of our like packages that we bought was that we added a lot of like good nursing books. We also added a lot of like hyper-specific immunology and like sub-Saharan Africa in that group. And that's great, but it's just not what we do. And so that was kind of the anxiety about decoupling for us, was that we had built those kind of understandings with people over time. And I'm not saying this is something you can build like over coffee immediately with people, because you can't. But that's kind of where we were coming from. Does that maybe add to? Okay.
Okay, we hit 4:40. I want to be respectful of your time. If you have questions for any of the presenters, please come up. I will speak to them. Sorry. So that's okay. But please come up and